Welcome to the Real Life Theology Podcast hosted by Renew.org. Whether it's your first time listening in or you've listened in tons of times before, we're just excited that you are here checking out our content. We have our podcast every week where we roll out our track sessions from our previous national gathering. We are working through Season 6, which is our 2023 National Gatherings track session material. In this episode, Doug Fultz from the Solomon Foundation talks a little bit about what the Solomon Foundation is all about, how it can help your church and your organization receive financial help for whatever project you may have coming up. The Solomon Foundation specializes in church loans and supporting ministry goals through finances. They offer many different financial services for churches, including retirement accounts for church leaders. Let's go ahead and check out what Doug has to say together, and we really hope that you enjoy this episode today.
My name's Doug. My name is also Doug, but it's Doug Fultz, and I'm a regional vice president, which means I basically am the area guy for the Southeast, and so I cover everything from New Orleans to Miami to Wilmington to Little Rock and everything in between those areas. But I'm just going to jump into this and give this presentation. Feel free if you guys have questions along the way. There will be a Q&A at the end, but if you do have questions, just interrupt me and we can stop and talk about that. So let's just jump into this. So what is or who is the Solomon Foundation? We're technically called a church extension fund. And church extension funds have been around since really, I guess they were established in the 1930s in the Securities Act of 33 and 34. And the way those are defined is that extension funds are supposed to operate within their affiliation of churches or their denomination. And so we work primarily in the restoration movement, and that would be the independent Christian churches, the non-instrumental churches of Christ. Mostly in those churches most of those have been among the black churches. A lot of those churches are unserved. We've become a large lender in that group of churches, and the international churches of Christ. And then there are these churches that restoration movement, they just don't know it. They just started the church, went to the scripture, built the church around that, and lo and behold, look at where they ended up. And we've got several loans there as well. We like to call ourselves a ministry partner, not just a lender. We get a lot more involved at the invitation of the church. We never force ourselves on a church. But if a church needs assistance in whatever area, if you all were just in there, you saw Ken Idleman. Ken is a big part of our team. Ken goes in, does a lot of coaching and training. We have others I'll get to a little bit later. But we want to come alongside a church and help them in every way to move forward and to grow and to be impactful in their area. And we want to be in relationship with churches. That's really, I'm called a relationship manager. And I was a pastor for about 30 years. And so I get around and get to know a lot of the pastors in that area. In your area would be Raleigh, Hutton, who does that. Detroit, you guys, that would be Randy Wheeler. I don't know if you all have met them. Like we said, we want to be there to help. So our core values, Ken kind of went over those on the stage. Honor God. You know, the way we do that too, one of the ways we do that is we tithe. And last year we gave out actually over $2 million. I think back to the churches that have loans with us, sponsoring a lot of the different events, things like that. We want to help people to come to know Jesus Christ. Ken mentioned this over 60,000 baptisms that have happened in those buildings. In those little booklets I provided, there's some rate sheets. You'll find that those rates are very good. We just actually raised them. A lot of banks and things are doing what's called teaser rates, where they'll give you a high rate of return on a very short-term investment. The reason they do that is because if the rates go back down, they don't have you for very long. We've raised all our rates, our long-term rates as well. And we're going to stick to that. And so you can trust those. And we're going to help churches get to the next step. As Ken said, we're only the fourth church extension fund to go over $1 billion in total assets. We did that in about 12 years. Doug Crozier, our CEO, he actually has been involved in church extension funds for close to 30 years. He came out of the banking world. He was an elder in a Christian church, was asked to be on the board of an extension fund called Church Development Fund on the West Coast. And he served there for about 15 years and grew that extension fund from less than $100 million in total assets to about $650 million in total assets. And then when he started the Solomon Foundation, as Ken said, there were a couple churches that gave some gifts. Jim Putman's church up in real life gave some property, and in 12 years it's grown to that size. And that's not because of us. That's because the restoration movement is growing rapidly. And we have over 500 loans out there that we're working with. And so a lot of great activity that's going on. It is the fastest growing church extension fund in American history. Financial track record, I'll get into that here in a minute. I'll show you some of the things that's going on. We meet all of our regulatory requirements. We have to be approved in all 50 states. And so every year, we have to provide, we get audited by one of the top auditors in the country. And they put out the circular, and it is published in all 50 states. And we have to meet all of those regulatory requirements, and have never failed to meet all of them and be approved in all 50 states. And financial strengths, we do have solid liquidity. If you've been hearing about some of these banks that have been failing, bottom line was they didn't have liquidity. A lot of them didn't have enough cash. And we do, I'll get into that here in a moment, an exceptional loan portfolio performance. We have funded some of the fastest growing churches in America. I'll tell you a few stories here in a minute. There's a little picture of our total asset growth since the beginning. This past year, we grew in assets by $163.5 million. That was pretty phenomenal. And our annual growth rate in 2022 was over 20%. And as you can see, the total asset growth and the annual asset growth, it's been quite steadily growing over the years. We closed 64 loans this past year, $146 million, funded $131 million in loans in 2022. We have a pipeline that says $254 million. We actually went through that this past week. We have over $300 million pipeline. Now, what that means is these are loans that either we've already approved and we say we're going to fund these but haven't funded them yet, or these are folks that are in the process of underwriting and wanting a loan. So I am in a different church every Sunday now this year, getting people to step up to invest with us. Because the way that works is people invest, we turn around, we loan that out to the churches, we pay our investors the rates that you see in those booklets, and that's how it happens. And so as you can see, there's a lot of activity out there right now. We have over 7,200 investors, over 11,200 accounts. There are lots of people that have more than one account. Over $950 million on deposit with us. Our largest single church investor is around $27 million. Our largest individual investor is around $13 million. We have a lot of people that's well over $1 million invested with us, and that trust us and feel like they can get a good rate, but not just making good money, making a big difference in the kingdom as a result. Here's the liquidity I talked about earlier. We have about $157 million in cash or cash equivalents. So a lot of cash. Liquidity rate, we are required to have a 7% liquidity rate. That's what the requirements are. We have 12.7%. We want to make sure if our investors need their money, we want to make sure we have it for them. And we have a $60 million line of credit. Now, this was with Hami Bank, a huge bank on the West Coast. And that's that prime. That's not prime plus. Who gets the prime? Their best customers. They've gone over us with a fine-tooth comb. They've looked at our books. They've looked at our circular, and they said, these guys are good for it, and we can trust them. And so that's actually getting ready to go up to $90 million because of our size. Usually, I think the last time that was done, we were around 600,000, and so about 10%. And so now that we're up to $1 billion in total assets, they're going to bump that up at prime that we have available. Our equity, about 70 million in equity. We own a lot of properties across the country. We increased by a net of 24 million in 2022. A lot of that had to do with the program we're doing now. It's planned giving. And when Megan gets in here, she can go over some of that with you. And we've increased our capital ratio from, we're required to have a 5% capital ratio. That means 5% of what we're loaning out there, we have in property, and that's gone up to over 7% now. Some of the churches that we've worked with, I'll tell you a few of these stories because that's kind of probably what you want to hear. Of course, Real Life Ministries, that's with Jim Putman. Doug remembers walking the fields with that guy and helping them do that growth. 242 Community Church. I don't know if you know the story of Dave Dummett, and he was on his way. He had a lender, and he was on his way to the big banquet you have when everybody makes their commitments. And on his way there, the lender calls and says, "We just met, and we're not going to do your loan." And I mean, can you imagine? You're on your way to get the commitments, and your lender backs out. And so he immediately calls Doug Crozier, and he's actually crying. He doesn't know what to do. Doug says, "I'll be there in 2 days, and go ahead and tell him you have the loan." And so Doug came out, and we did that loan, and you've seen the results. I mean, the church went from 900 to 3,300 in one Sunday in that new facility. Just a phenomenal story of what's happened there. Ecclesia Christian Church, really interesting story there. I don't know if y'all know Matt and Tina Wilson. Phenomenal leaders, you know. One of the things we say is we underwrite leadership. And we'll do a high-risk loan if we see that the leadership of that church and the potential of that church is explosive. And Matt and Tina were that type of couple. I remember me and a guy named Russell Johnson meeting with Matt, and he thought we were out of our minds. And but they were wanting to build a facility, a 15,000 square foot facility. And everybody they talked to said, you can only afford a 10,000 square foot facility. If you build 1 square foot above that, you all will lose your church. You'll go bankrupt. There's no way you'll make it. And so they met with us and they said, "Will you build us a 15,000 square foot facility?" And we, kind of did our background, see what was going on in that church. I went and attended the service, and we came back and said, "No, we won't build you 15,000 square foot, but we'll build you 30,000 square foot because you'll be out of space the minute you get in there." And sure enough, their first Sunday, they were busting out the seams. And that happened, that was about 5 years ago. And since then, we have bought 2 30,000 square foot facilities adjacent to them. One's a college that's paying them $38,000 a month in lease. The other one they've turned into a ministry hub, and we just broke ground on a 1,200 square foot or a 1,200 seat worship center, all in 5 years. One of the fastest growing churches around. And Matt and Tina are doing a fantastic job at that church. That's one of those stories, that Doug Crozier has always been really good about being able to judge what's going to happen in those churches. River Christian, I remember meeting with one of their elders. The church was running about 80 people, and they did not have a pastor, and they wanted to buy a dance studio and convert it into a church. And so we met with the leadership, and we got a really good sense about this, and we said, "Okay, we'll help you do this facility, but we'll also help you find a pastor." And so Ken Ottoman helped us find a guy named Nathan Freeman. He was out in Phoenix area. And Nathan was actually in the Non-Instrumental Church of Christ, but he came back to Jackson. He'd grown up around Jacksonville, Florida. And so went into this church, less than 100 people. And within 2 years, they were busting out the seams. They were running 400. And we started looking at building a new facility for them. But there was a building right down the street, became available. It was a campus of one of our churches in Jacksonville. And so we moved them in there. And I was down there a few weeks ago, and they had 1,700. And that's in less than 5 years. And that's one of those churches that just blew up. And Nathan is very, very connected with a lot of our folks in our Solomon family. East Point Christian Church, Portland, Maine, meeting in an airline hangar. Bought them bought him an old Home Depot, and completely redid that entire facility. That church was almost 3,000. And Scott Tobby has just retired, and he's come on our team now. He's going to do what I do, more in Kentucky and Northeast, up in that area is where Scott's going to be working. Great leader. Love Scott. The Churches of Christ. We tapped into a group of churches a few years ago. We got into a relationship with a guy named Orpheus Hayward. Y'all probably know Orpheus. He speaks at this event quite a bit. Orpheus was leading a church on Abernathy Boulevard there on the west side of Atlanta. The church was running, about 700-800 people, debt-free. They had a building that was worth $2.3 million. They had just bought 45 acres with cash on the outer loop of Atlanta. And they had about $800,000 in cash and could not get a single bank in all of Atlanta to give them a loan. Now, that told us something. There was something seriously wrong with that picture. I mean, we jumped on that and we built them a really nice facility, and they're doing fantastic. But we said, you know what? There is a group of churches out there that are under-resourced, and that was the African American Churches of Christ. And so we dove into that. I'm in the Southeast. That's where most of them are. So probably over half of my loans that I do are with these African American Churches of Christ. And these churches were entirely underfunded. They could not get loans. And they had these dilapidated buildings. And it was really difficult for them to be able to do ministry in that kind of a context. And so we have been very I don't even know what the right word is, supportive of that. I'll tell you about one that's probably my favorite. It's in New Orleans. We have some things going on in New Orleans, and I met a guy named David Green. And David had spent 7 years in Angola prison. That's Louisiana State Penitentiary, most violent prison in America. And he was on there on death row. He was in there for murder. Turned out he didn't commit the murder. He was just with a group of kids that had robbed a place, and one of the kids shot the owner and killed him. David's the guy got caught. But he ends up getting out. He didn't have anywhere to go, so he goes right back into crime. He's in and out of prison 2 or 3 times. Finally, he meets this Church of Christ minister. He brings him to the Lord. And of course, David is just on fire. And he says, my heart is for reentry ministry. And for people who are coming out of prison, I want to help them transition and come to know the Lord. So he started this ministry out in Kansas called Hope House, and where the guys would get out. He had a place for them to stay. They'd pay rent. He had a job for them. They went through all the drug counseling, the family counseling, discipleship, baptizing people. David starts speaking at some of these places, and the chaplain at Angola happens to be there at one of his sessions, comes up to him later and says, David, I'm going to be stepping out as a chaplain. I need someone to come down and take over this for me. And there's some churches available in New Orleans. So David goes back to New Orleans, takes over the leadership of this little church, and becomes the chaplain. And David gets in there and rolls up his sleeve. And that group that meets in Angola is the largest Restoration Movement church in the state of Louisiana. Every Sunday they have 1,700 men that meet together. And David isn't there most of the Sundays because he's already trained all of these evangelists. They have online degrees inside. And so David's doing this ministry. He's helped well over 3,000 people transition. And so when we were doing our due diligence, I called Brent Montgomery, who's the number 2 guy in the penal system in the state of Louisiana. And I said, I know you track this because all of these guys have parole officers. What is their recidivism rate? How effective are they? And he said, well, I'll tell you. He said the average recidivism rate in America, in the U.S. right now, is 65%. That means they get rearrested. He said their recidivism rate is 11.3%. It's unheard of. I asked David and Jamie about it, and they said, yeah, if it wasn't for the same 3 knuckleheads, it'd be 0. They keep getting in trouble. And it's phenomenal. They're baptizing hundreds of people, but they didn't have a place to house them. They had the job thing going. They had, the counseling thing going, but they didn't have anywhere to put them. And of course, these ministries have lots of money, right? They don't have 2 nickels to rub together. And so we had to get very creative. And so we helped them buy an assisted living facility where they eventually will have well over 100 men at a time in there. And they are now in that facility, and that thing is growing, and it's a phenomenal ministry. And I've been trying to get Bobby to get David here to talk about his discipleship, with guys coming out of prison, because it's phenomenal, the things they're doing. They gave me their stuff, and there's a stack of books about that big that these guys go through. And last time we were there was a guy that just got out of prison. He'd been in prison 60 years. 60 years. Can you imagine that? But that's some of those churches that we're working with. And then we've just started working with the International Churches of Christ. Anybody here with the ICOC? No, I don't think so. Those churches, of course, they came out of kind of an oppressive situation. People even called it cultish. They've decentralized a few years ago, and they've gotten pretty healthy. And so I got to know a guy named Marshall Mead. I was visiting with Marshall, and Marshall said, yeah, we're doing our summit next summer. And I said, what is that? He says, that's every 4 years. All of the International Churches of Christ come together for us. I said, how many is going to be there? He said, probably 30,000. I said, what? So I called our CEO and said, we got to be a part of this. So we ended up becoming the top supporter of that. And that has just exploded in interest across the country with these International Churches of Christ. You guys are going to be in Huntsville. There's an ICLC right there. In fact, at one point, they had a church in every city in the world over 100,000 in population. That's the reach of those churches. And so it's great to be able to re-engage with them. And so that's who we work with. Some of the things, I want to tell you about here is just kind of how we work with churches. And, the first one here, creativity. A lot of times you go to a bank, Doug Crozier came out of the banking world. He says this, he says, bankers are taught to say no, to give all the reasons they should not do your loan. We're just the opposite. If this leadership team feels God is leading them to do this project, then we're going to do everything we can to say yes and find ways to do that. I'll tell you one of the ways we've connected in with one of the top guys in the country when it comes to putting in Christian preschools. He has a financial model that is amazing in the revenue that brings in these churches. But his main interest is on-ramping new people into the church. In fact, he called me a couple weeks ago and he says, Doug, I can't work with this church. I said, why? He says, because all they talk about is money. They don't even care about the evangelism side. He says, the main reason I do this is evangelism, and the money is secondary. This guy's name is Nelson Eagle. Well, he used to be a Flying Heart. Now he still works for Flying Heart a little bit, right? But and he's got his own company now. But sometimes he will refer us to Lionheart. So we've worked with Lionheart. Nelson is the guy. I mean, he's the man. And Lionheart's another thing that we've worked with. But I'll just give you an example. There's a church up in North Carolina, 152 students. After everybody's paid, they're clearing over 500,000 a year. And, that pays a pretty big mortgage. That'll pay about $7 million, I think, in mortgage. And you've got a Christian ministry. You're reaching the community. He does all the training, does all the hiring and firing. They will hire right out of your church. Your board is made up of your church members. But it's a creative way that we say, okay, you can't afford that on your own. So let's help you discover some ways. You guys are going to have a donut shop. A Christian donut shop, and they're right across the street. In fact, from a military base. Do you think there's very many people going to be getting donuts going in and out of that military base? What's the name of you're running that thing? Yeah.
We haven't come up with a name.
But the company you're working with is, I forget the name of it. What's not Daylight. But anyhow, it's a great business model. We've gone over the model, and and it's going to help fund, what to do. So we'll help you all. We'll get creative in helping you with that. We do want you to be networked with. We have a Solomon family. Paradise. That's it. Paradise. Yep. So we're going to help you find ways to get it done. You'll be networked with people all across the country. The partnership, coaching. This is something that's really interesting. We want to provide the thing that'll hurt a loan in our world more than anything else is not the finances. There's two things that'll bring a loan down. You know what it is? Number one, moral failure in the pulpit, right? Number two, leadership breakdown when the pastor gets sideways with the elders. And so we do a lot to try and make sure that the pastors are healthy, the eldership teams are healthy. One of the first things that Doug Crozier did when COVID hit was hire a guy, a PhD clinical psychologist who specializes in pastoral burnout, Dr. Wes Beavis. And we subsidize a good part of what Wes does. He'll do insurance. It won't cost the pastor a dime. And the last I looked, Wes was working with about 65 pastoral couples. And I can pick up the phone anytime, call Wes and say, Wes, there's a situation, and he will be right on it. And I've just gotten raving reviews. When we went to Hawaii for our conference, there were 6 pastors. He told Doug Crozier there were 6 pastors who were getting ready to quit. And they said that when they went home, they were going to resign from their ministries. And after the conference and after working with Wes, all 6 are still in the ministry and thriving and doing well. What time do we got to be done here? 12:30? Okay, so we got plenty of time here. Okay. I want to make sure I didn't want to cut into Megan's time back there. What's that? 12:15? Okay, very good, very good. But we try to provide people like that to help assist the church. Ken Idleman's another guy. I can pick up the phone anytime and call Ken and say, Ken, this is church over here. One of the staff people molested a child in the ministry. You need to step in and help him. And Ken's all over it. Or this church over here, they need some help on stewardship. Raising stewardship, or they need some leadership training. Can you step in? And that's on our dime, that we will provide that for you. And of course, we can network with a lot of the really good coaching organizations. Don Wilson and Mike Nave, they were founding board members of Solomon, and they do this thing now called Accelerate Group. Don, of course, planted and built up Christ Church of the Valley. It runs into over 30,000 in attendance today, and Don is just one of the sharpest guys in the country. And we've got a great relationship with Don and getting people hooked up with those coaching groups. So any kind of needs you all have, you can call us, and we want to do everything we can to help you all get to that next step. So you're here probably because there's something you're interested in. Are you interested in new facilities? Let me walk you through the steps on that. If you're looking to do a new facility and you're looking for a lender, one of the first things you want to do is reach out to the representative in your area. I cover the Southeast. If I can give you the information on who the person is in your area, and you tell them what you're wanting to do. And one of the first things they will do is they will get our loan team to send you what we need to begin the underwriting process. Now, there's 2 parts to that. The first part is all about the finances. And what we're trying to do is see what we could qualify you for, the amount. And so if you give us 4 years of finances and baptism, we want to know baptisms and attendance. So we put all of that into a system that gives us a rating. Then we'll be able to give you pretty much a budget on what you're available for. Now, the way we do these loans, a lot of times lenders will want 20% down. If you're going to do a facility, we waive that. We do 100. You don't have to put anything down with us. The reason we do that is because most churches don't have 20% sitting around somewhere. And if they do, we would rather them pour that into ministry and church growth because they're going to need that money once they get in that facility. What we do require would be a minimum of 3 months of mortgage payment reserves. That's your money. It's drawing interest for you, but it's there in case there's an emergency of some kind, or if you can't pay your mortgage that month. And so a minimum of 3% of 3 months. It could be 4 or 5 based on where you rate. Where if you rate low, it's 3%, medium, moderate, those kinds of things. What we'll also want you to do is when you find that facility and you want to make an offer, we can send you a letter very quickly if we have that pre-qualification that will indicate that we have pre-qualified you for the amount that you're offering on that facility, so that they know that you're a serious person, purchaser, and they're willing to go under contract and tie that facility up. And then we will need to get all of your underwriting in. There's a second step, and that's any lender are going to want those kinds of items for the underwriting. And then once a month, we go through loan approval meeting. And if you can get your information in about 8 days before that meeting, you'll go up for approval that month. And once you're approved, you'll get a letter of intent that'll lay out all of the terms, what your payments will be, all of those kinds of information that you're going to need. And then we go into the closing, and the closing takes about 30 to 45 days, really dependent upon the local municipalities and how quickly they can get documents in. We move as quickly as we can. And we have 2 guys who are our construction guys, a guy named Bill Shelkowski and Tom Vick, and they spend most of their time flying across the country. If there is construction involved, they will be all over that to help you. They will sit down with your GC, and the first thing we'll do is we'll do a background check to make sure they're licensed, to make sure they have a good reputation. And then they will sit down with them, and they will make sure that everything is in line, that things are cost efficient, and they will get a guaranteed maximum price. And then they will also line out a timeline to make sure that we're on schedule, and they'll sign that contract. And then when it comes time to draw that money out, we hold that money at Solomon. They'll write into a draw request. We'll train you how to do that. It'll go to Tom or to go to Bill, and those guys will go over that with a fine-tooth comb. I was in the car with Bill one day, and he was going over one of these items, these lists for a draw list, and he said, and he picked up the phone, he called this GC, he said, line item 117, why are you using that material when it's more expensive and it's not any better than this material that's half the price? I mean, that's how much he goes over it. We build 20% contingency into loans because there's things, that cost more as you go along. But because of the diligence of Bill and Tom, our average is about 5%. So it saves you a lot of money working with those guys, and it doesn't cost you anything extra. They fly in, they fly out, they do all those calls on our dime. And so that's there to help you with that. So that's pretty much how it works in that regard.
Thanks for joining us again today at the Real Life Theology Podcast. Hopefully this information and message from the Solomon Foundation helps you understand what they're all about, how maybe your church is in a situation where you need financial help, or you want to buy a building, or you want to set up retirement for your staff. They can be a great resource for you to check out. If you haven't gotten your 2024 National Gathering tickets for the Renew Gathering, we just invite you to go on renew.org, grab your tickets today. We would love to see you there. If you enjoyed this track session and the other track sessions on our podcast for season 6, we're going to have a lot of great content like this at the 2024 gathering. So we just invite you to be there. Would love for you to bring your team, bring anybody interested that could benefit from the mission and impact of Renew. We would love to see you there and partner with you in this. We hope you have a great day and rest of your week.